the proficiency guidelines from ACTFL 1982 was the original, what I want to say, the attempt of kind of first version, preliminary version, 82, final version in 86. The preliminary, by the way, if you can find that chestnut, an old copy of the original preliminary guidelines from 82, they include generic guidelines for listening, speaking, reading, writing, the 4 skills, and culture, the 5th skill. They disbanded that. They just said, no, we can't do it because too many of us in the profession said, wait a minute, even generically, it's really hard to talk about culture as monolithic. What they do, in fact, I can even say within a language, within Spanish is, what they do in Mexico is very different from what they do in Spain, which is different from Argentina, which is different from Cuba, and so it goes, right? In Russian, same thing, and all of our languages. Francophonie, I mean, if we go from, say, what's happening in Paris to what's happening in Quebec to what's happening in, say, thank you, I was going to say Sub-Saharan French or Caribbean French. Goodness, I mean, the Frenches, again, are as equally as culturally diverse. So that notion that ACTFL briefly at least said, maybe there is this thing called a 5th skill, something that where we talk about teaching reading, teaching writing, teaching listening, teaching speaking, and somehow maybe those are integrated. Is there this 5th thing we need to integrate? Still, this is well into the 80s. We weren't quite sure culture needed fully to be an integrated part. Finally, by the end of the 80s, I'm going to say, with the real inception of the proficiency movement, it's finally getting some legs. What becomes a sine qua non, what we all said, we've got to do this. Like, stop the bus. We've been moving way too far, too fast, with culture left behind. We must teach it somehow, some way. We will work it into our curriculum. The response, by the way, yes, I have a visual, to we must teach culture was what? Hang on, I'm already teaching, I'm already behind trying to get enough grammar lexicon so my students can read Tolstoy or Proust or whatever your target literary hero is or heroine is. How do I throw culture into? How will I possibly get it to fit in? And here lies the paradox of the 90s. The proficiency movement finally catching on, more and more of us kind of throwing out our grammar translation, even our audiolingual method books, rolling in communicative competence, rolling in new proficiency-oriented textbooks and materials, that now at least we are giving lip service to culture. There's culture notes that start to appear in our textbooks in the 90s. There are culture modules that are fully integrated into our curricula in these textbooks. But we're still looking at culture somehow as ancillary to the major task of what we do. The end of the 20th, beginning of 21st century changes culture, at least in the literature now, as an integrated skill. So rather than thinking, and I still hear people say it, and with all good intention, and so I don't say, I'm not going to don't call culture a 5th skill any more than I would say, if you think of teaching speaking as its own standalone skill without teaching, especially listening, and combining that then with reading and writing, you're not fully teaching language. So I'm not going to say, if you're talking about teaching culture without teaching the languagey part, I'm not going to argue with that, right? So call it a 5th skill, fine, as long as you understand that it's one of those 5 that are all integrated, one with the other. So culture is part of this big cycle, not of simply listening, reading, writing, speaking, but with culture throughout all of those. So what does that look like? Well, we started with, and I wish Carl were still here because I wanted to kind of poke this a bit, we at least began paying more than lip service to the integration of culture in what we did, and I think one of the more visually useful things for changing the minds of teachers, and I'm agreeing with Carl on this doesn't quite get at quite what we all mean by integrated, but it's a start. When the World Readiness Standards came out in their first edition, and I'm proud to say as of this year, last year, 2017, 18, 19, are the rollout years for the new World Readiness Standards. They're coming out in sequence now, each group of about 3 to 4 languages every few months now online. Russian is in the batch that's coming out right now, hopefully by the end of August. Russian will have now not K through 12, but K through 16 standards for world readiness. The 5 C's, again, a great moniker, a great kind of memorizable, easy to hang on to conceptual model. Puts at the top, obviously, communication visually. It's also the kind of red circle among them, and our eye goes right to it. But right next to it, if we go clockwise around, is cultures. What's really cool is that as all the remaining connections, comparison, communities are these more, in a sense, ways of putting language into use, cultures remains together with communication as kind of the two bulwarks, the two things that pin language instruction now in the 21st century. So I'm going to kind of quibble, I'm going to say I won't quibble with culture being its own kind of purple ring here, but rather say I like the idea that if we think of it, this icon as a way of thinking of culture as integrated, it's okay. More practically, though, is what do the standards actually say about culture? And that's where I think Carlo and I completely agree, is what they actually say is that culture now is very clearly defined, not as modular or a single day, but truly integrated in being able to answer some of the most important questions we want students to be asking themselves in language instruction. The how of things, the why of things, the what of things in language, rather than say, as again, my generation, here's a list of vocabulary, learn it by Thursday, there'll be a quiz. Here's the grammar for this week's lesson, learn it, there'll be a quiz. Put the two together, write an essay. Yay for language in the 1970s, what can I say? We all somehow survived it, but it took, for me, 6 years living in Moscow actually to get what I was paying Harvard a lot of money to give me, and they didn't do so well. So the how, why, what of it all really did talk about what a lot of us probably knew, us meaning language teachers, probably knew instinctively about what we were doing in the classroom. Because so many of us brought things like bits of the culture to class. Here's a French newspaper that came into the library. Here's my own Matryoshka doll that I picked up on my last trip to Russia. Here is Mexican candy that we're going to have with coffee. Whatever, little bits of culture that were the products of that culture, around which we could then in class talk about the practices associated with them. How does one drink tea in Morocco? In fact, my quick sidebar here. After very carefully, I'm about to step down as the director of the Arabic flagship program here, which I was supposed to do for 1 semester, and I finally am finishing my 3rd year as director of the Arabic flagship program. For my sins, I was given this extra duty and have made several trips now to Morocco to visit our students there. And part of my terror of going to an Arabic-speaking country with no Arabic, fortunately in Morocco there's a lot of French, and my French is at least sort of serviceable. But quickly I wanted at least to know some of these, so I wouldn't make some of the worst faux pas that an American could make there. And one of the things I was told is you'll absolutely, because you're going to be the guest of honor, you're going to have, they'll invite you between classes to tea, and you need to know how to drink tea. And one of the things they're going to probably ask you, because you're the guest, is to pour tea. In Morocco, you pour tea from a very high distance and come back down, so practice. The glass is very small, the tea is very high, and it goes everywhere if you're not good. And you'll look like an idiot if you don't do it right. So I practiced pouring tea, and I got it right. And I went into this meeting, and they said, would you like to pour the tea? Of course I'd like to pour the tea. And I poured the tea from about 6 feet. I didn't spill a drop. I poured with my left hand, because I'm left-handed. I'm left-handed. And of course, they said, would you like to pour the tea? I grabbed the teapot, of course, and I poured it left-handed. And you could just see the looks of what, polite shock. They didn't want me to feel like a total jerk, but there was this, give me the teapot. And let's pour that again. And that's good. And of course, if I had poured it with my right hand, it would have gone everywhere. But not quite getting it right, as you know, even in the simplest of things, as we call them, cultural faux pas happens there. So we were already doing a number of these. The one big one that I say we miss a lot, even today, the hard one to get at, perspectives, is what actually is going on in a culture when, for example, in Flemish-speaking lands, wedding dresses are black. And that's not simply a point of, oh, Trivial Pursuits, wedding dresses are black, not white in these areas, but what is actually behind that? Why are they? Almost everyone has an answer to why they're white in a lot of parts of the world. That is one part of the answer. Everyone always assumes it's about purity and virginity. And it's part of it. There's often much more associated with it. A lot of our perspectives on things like, well, this has caused so much problem in the 21st century. Perspectives on religion. Perspectives on migration. Right, it's probably shifted almost every single election in this past election cycle globally, not just in the US. Brexit, the near disaster in the Netherlands, the very close French race. All of these shifts in thinking have largely had to do with a shift in cultural perspective, especially on the issues of migration and safety, especially around terrorism. So culture is a massive thing that we should be dealing with, and finally the standards are a first step at getting us to that point. Now, having said all that, and that was a lot of breath there, everything old is new again, and here's where I say no shame, so if you're still doing this, you're not the only one. So you think with all that ink that we've spilled out there about what we should be doing in our classrooms, the standards telling us, don't just be saying, look, I brought you a gift from Russia, there it is, but to talk about why is this given? What do people do? The classic thing, do Mexicans really wear sombreros? Well, no, not at all, actually. Why do we all buy them? Who knows anymore, right? Right? What you can and can't do in culture, do we even do that? Not so much. So, just to remind you, just so that no one feels too embarrassed, culture is modular. These are all, by the way, from, I ripped all this from the internet, of course, a couple of examples are from the last year being posted. So these are very, very recent. So, culture is modular, the idea that we say, here's a little bit of Mexico, a little bit of France, a little bit of Russia, a little bit of Israel, right? Here's a module of X. Here's why, and I'm going to use Russia because that's the language I teach. Here's an example of what is still being used in our classrooms today, and what's good, bad, or ugly about them.
Привет всем! Меня зовут Анастасия. Как вы думаете, какой праздник в России является самым молодым государственным праздником? Это День России. Праздник рождения нового государства, который отмечают каждый год 12 июня. И в этом уроке я расскажу вам именно о нем. Как вы считаете, как россияне относятся к празднику Дня России? Мы покажем вам ответ в конце этого видео. Праздник Дня России берет свое начало в 1990 году, когда была принята Декларация о государственном суверенитете, и Россия приобрела статус независимого государства. В 1994 году праздник стал государственным праздником, а с 2002 года он стал официально именоваться Днем России. В этот праздничный день в Георгиевском зале Большого Кремлевского дворца президент Российской Федерации по традиции вручает государственные премии деятелям науки и культуры за выдающиеся достижения в области науки и технологий, литературы и искусства. По случаю Дня России в Кремле устраивает большой прием.
There's a few more, it's a little bit longer. It's only about, as you can see, it's about a 3.5-minute piece, but it's a module on the National Day, Russia Day. It's called the National Day of Russia, Russia Day. You may see. It's contemporary, obviously a native speaker. There's a lot of information there. You're even getting this really cool kind of very techie, like a news feed right on your cell phone, giving you some cool words that you should probably be pulling out for your listening comprehension. But what's still not quite, as we'd say in Russian, что здесь не то? What's not quite right here? It's context. What do you do with this? What she mentions, this is relatively new. Why do we need a new? Suddenly we have a new holiday? Yay! That's a good thing. I love holidays, but why? There's no mention of Russia just 10 years earlier had fallen to pieces. The Soviet Union was no more. And now a new country had been formed, Russia, the Russian Federation, Why do we need, there's a whole wonderful cultural context here, that, and I'm not saying let's make this module any longer than it is, but it needs to somehow be more integrated in what it is we're doing in the class. So again, this isn't a bad thing to do, it's somewhat misguided unless it's here just to fill some time up. Or unless your curriculum is already very carefully talking about holidays, integrating those into the grammar lexicon, then it would have a place. So, sorry about that. So, culture is modular. Its big problem is it gives one piece of a much larger puzzle. So you're getting this one chunk of Russia National Day, and you're missing kind of the larger picture, the larger context of it. Now one more just for fun. And here, 1,000 parts, and I always have to do these kind of, what would I call them, this sort of disclosure laws here of no offense to anyone Mormon or of any religion at all. It happens that this piece, which I actually love for the purpose of demonstration, is a Mormon missionary who had done work in Russia and is now back training, doing a series of video modules, training new missionaries going to spread the word in Russia. So here is his now. X's, Russians, are like this talk before sending a group of new missionaries over.
Russians are very, very traditionally minded. It only has been recently with the improvements in technology and whatnot that Russian has become a little more westernized, where the younger generations are acting a little more like Americans and Europeans. But Russians, you'll see that in their culture a lot of things seem very underdeveloped or primitive or kind of 18th, 19th century American stuff. And it's because they are so founded on their traditions, the traditions of their culture, the traditions of their family and whatnot. They don't want to differ from what they've seen, and they have been through some very, very rough times. Russia has been around for thousands of years longer than the United States, and so I've seen many, many more hardships and trials than we have. They have been through wars that we could never imagine on their own territory. And so the people, when the American media depicts Russians very improperly. They depict them as these really gruff, angry drunks and whatnot that we see, but they come off that way right from the beginning, or on the surface, because of the hardships they've been through. They have had to have developed hard skins in order to survive and progress through the communistic era and whatnot that they have been through. But you'll find that Russians they seem like they don't smile, but I kind of like to view Russians as like a chocolate covered bunny, like they have that hard outer shell, but are just the most loyal, loving, best friends you'll ever have on the inside. If you can get a Russian to trust you and to call you friend, that honor is far greater than being called a friend. In America, you'll call a person that you just met on Facebook your friend. But in Russia, if I call you my friend, it means I would bleed and die for you. You are more important to me than family, because family you're stuck with, friends you get to choose. And they are absolutely loyal in every sense of the word. They will do anything for you. They will smile, they'll laugh, they'll sing and dance with you. They're so loving and open if you can get them to trust you. They are very, very honest and blunt. That's just their culture. It's not offensive. Russians are through the communistic era and whatnot that they have been through.
I apologize, I literally mishit that. It was at the last few words there. So, best intentions, honestly. This is one of those cases where everything he says is based on his own experience there, and so it's with best intentions that he's trying to say, don't go in with these preconceived notions about Russians. They're not like that. They're like this. So, yeah.
I mean, I did though appreciate the chocolate bunny reference. It was the first time I felt my soulmate in how I read Russians.
So no, as I say, it's hard. It's easy for us here to kind of look at this and point fingers. As I said, the best of intentions here, and yet this kind of presentation very typical of our earlier language modules or language days, where we'd say, You know, so Dr. Garza, tell us, so what are Russians like? Right? And we start saying, well, and indeed, those few words, by the way, change everything. Once we say, in my experience, the Russians I have met, some of them, and already now you've made it very clear, it may not be everybody, but it's not culture, no culture is that monolithic. No culture is that monolithic, and so we need to be careful and wary. So what I love about this, and right away a lot of you are saying, oh, you can't say that, because there's always going to be differences. I love the fact that because this is one from a series of these, there's a blog site that goes with it, and I pull literally, these are the most recent comments. Can you read those in the back there? These are almost all Russians. Dmitry Chemankov, you know, shaking hands with your gloves off has nothing to do with cleanliness. In fact, if we both have our gloves on, we would take them off before. It's just our tradition. I don't know its roots. This is a Russian speaking, right? But it's not about hygiene, that's for sure, right? And then you have, Russians do have houses. He makes some comments there. We do have private space. It's just very small for big city guys. It's pretty large for country guys. It's the same that goes on. There was some time when there were only single doors. And this was supposed to be where they were wooden and they would never close. Everything has now changed since the 1990s. It's a true thing about the gloves, although I don't know the reasons, but you can see right away, as soon as among native speakers and certainly bearers of the culture, any of these monolithic statements are made, you're going to find one or two people say, well, I don't do that, right? I don't do that, and I'm going to say that about all of us. The classic, oh, Americans, we just all smile all the time. And yeah, that all causes Russians a great deal of problem, is that a lot of Americans will come and they'll get on the metro and do this, right? And our perception is Russians never smile. One of the things is Russians don't smile. It doesn't mean they're unhappy, they just don't smile. Well, yes, but I can tell you I've got some students now that American students never smile. I have some Russian friends who love to smile, right? These monolithic statements, a little tougher. So where do we go? And I'll go to a chestnut of mine that I use repeatedly, just to give you a sense, why is it so important that we move away from these insular, modularized ways of viewing culture and go to something that's considerably more integrated? So a single image. This is from the late 50s. It's from the Khrushchev era of the Soviet Union, where you would see these in subway stations. The people's dreams have come true. This kind of declaration that we're post-revolution, we're now in the era of the great space age. We have put a ship into orbit, a satellite Sputnik into orbit. We put a dog in space. We're about to launch Gagarin into space. We are there. We're into this new era. And so you get this iconic image of what does this notion of our dreams, the people's dreams, right? Soviet Union, great Soviet. And you see, as it were, an icon of icons that for a native speaker is immediately interpreted. And for us, those working in the language, we either pick away at it or we take it at face value. When I ask most of my students first time, before we've had any real exposure to it, is they see an older man with a younger boy on what they eventually will interpret as a riverboat, a boat. And he's talking, the older man is talking to him. And I love this also, Americans will almost always, my students I should say, will say, it's probably his grandfather, right? So we hope so, yes. Yes. Let's hope, it's grandpa. So that's kind of just the base text, but we start to pull it apart, and well, right away, any Russian we show this to, especially back in the day, but even now I show this now, really is now a rarity, that it really is just this kind of rarity now to see some of these older images, but they go, oh God, they made him look like Lenin. Why does Grandpa look like Lenin? Of course he does, right? Every Lenin was a grandpa, and so of course. We right away see Grandpa reads Pravda, the state newspaper. Grandpa's a good guy. He's one of us, as it were, because he reads Pravda. The young boy is wearing a red kerchief. He's a pioneer. He's a good Boy Scout, a Soviet Boy Scout. He's reading the also good. He's intelligent. He's smart. He's one of us, he's going to be one of us. We see a lovely image up above of the Volga boatmen by the classic 19th century painter Readiness. It's basically the same scene 100 years ago that we're now seeing outside the river. Used to be that slaves had to pull our boat up the river in those imperial days. But look now, under the great leadership of Stalin, the Volga is now passable with a series of locks. Isn't it fabulous? We're there. So we get all these incredible internal cultural references that a native speaker doesn't even think about how she's parsing as she looks at the image. We, the learner, has to pick them apart. So how do we get our students to the point that, and I'll get to the next one, that when our students see the image, they don't just see the picture, but they see all the associated parts, the Volga River and what it asserts, the pioneers and their costume, Repin's Volga boatmen, the painter himself, Repin, the writer Nekrasov, Pravda, the newspaper that's the party line. How do we integrate all that parts? Is by every single text we teach, making clear what the cultural references are in it. So, what is new in what we're doing in getting at culture? The big movement, and I've got a lot of text up here, so I'm not going to spend too much time on the text part, because as I said, you can read this when Betsy will post all of our slides here, and you can read the text itself from them. But the Interagency Language Roundtable, this is the branch of the government that does language training for all of our different letters, the FBI, the NSA, the CIA, the KGB, whatever. Now, these days, who knows? Who knows who we're training? They actually were the precursor to the proficiency guidelines, the ACTFL guidelines. The ACTFL guidelines were actually based on the ILR guidelines. So they, in 2012, added on a new set of descriptors for intercultural competence, referred to by Orlando in his talk. Here's a link. Let me see, this may be working to give you a sense. That link should be hot. Yes, it is. If you'd like to just go, the full website, it's not ridiculously long. You can actually see at each level of competency, the novice level here, 0, 0 plus, the intermediate level here at 1, advanced level 2, professional competence superior, level 3, and then distinguished levels up here. And each one of these has the descriptors for what, and a little example you can listen to here of what these generically mean in terms of culture. Now let me go to one that's easier for us to deal with, let's say around elementary competence. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't flip my bad, I didn't flip the video. I need to get out of here. Here we go. I realize I've been talking and you haven't seen the image I was looking at. There we are here. So when you click on that eye, it's going to take you to this page. Here we go. And so you can click on any level here, as I said, novice, intermediate, advanced, superior, and distinguished. And it will take you to the segment where you can read what the descriptors are. Now you're going to see these are very, very generic again. The ILR is trying, at the very least, to prepare our servicemen and women going abroad to be able to have minimal cultural competence at the various levels to match up with their language levels of competence. So at the, let's look just to give you an idea, at the intermediate level, elementary here, able to participate in some everyday activities, interaction, though not always acceptably, recognizes that differences exist between behaviors, norms and values of individuals' own cultures and those of one's own culture, but shows little understanding of the significance or nature of these differences. So at this level you might get, going back to Russian again, is the understanding that Russian does, unlike English, have, like most of the languages you all work in, has a singular and plural form in addressing someone, so they like having the tu and usted form or the tu vu form. We have a ty and vy form in Russian. That usage is not simply a quick choice. that it's almost prescribed, that if you're addressing someone for the first time, you better use, as you would probably say if you speak French or Spanish, you want to use the formal form. You want to use the vous form when you're addressing someone for the first time. If you're addressing a small child, you may choose to use a thee form with a small child. How all these things come together would put someone to say, well, I understand that idea, but I still make mistakes in it, would be in this category. So you can see how we can extrapolate from the languages we know and kind of, in a sense, work between this text. It's trying to get at, it's not a perfect text. This is generic. So we still have to massage it, adjust it for our languages. And that's kind of where we are now, is individual languages are trying to work out cultural guidelines for our own instructors in our own languages. But I just wanted you to get a sense that this, the ICC, the Intercultural Competence Guidelines, were a major, major, major step. Go back to my slides, were a major step in talking about intercultural competence in our language classes. There we go. And then I put a few of the bits of the scriptures here that intercultural communication, ICC, refers to both the content and form of communication. That's what we've been teaching, verbal and nonverbal. But it also talks about the ability to take part effectively in a social context by understanding what's being communicated in employing appropriate language and behavior to convey an intended message. This is going directly back to what Carl was saying earlier, right? It's not just getting the langue right, but getting the parole as well. You've got to get the combination of the two mix. Now, way too much text. These are now giving you, again, from the bottom up, again, intermediate, advanced, superior, and then professional at the very top if you want to read what some of the individual descriptors are. And all of that brings us, all of that background I wanted to use to bring us to where I see us going, right? Now, if we're talking about this as then and now, then I'd like to take it now and a little bit, a foot or two into the future. So we've moved from a kind of transmission, I'll use my pointer here, a transmission of information. There's my pointer. Here it is, this column, from very much mastery learning, memorizing stuff from exercises, doing written work. The teacher was the great bearer of knowledge. The tests were all achievement-based. How many answers did you get right? 68%, you got a D+, right? It was just real, it was very, very form-based, as you can see, the syllabus. Here's where we were. That's the then part. We're currently somewhere in the middle now between transaction and transformation. In fact, we should be squarely in transactional, for sure, that we're moving a lot more toward, and both Orlando and Carl spoke about this in the textbook, that that we saw, in a sense, performed, right? This idea of an interactional textbook, a textbook that allows the student to move through at her own speed practically, right? I'll do this exercise and then move from one part to another. Has more to do with this kind of experiential learning. It's from the works of both John Dewey and also Paulo Freire. A lot of task-based projects. The teacher now is no longer the great font of information, but a facilitator. The tests are now proficiency-based. We're looking not at, did you get the answer right or wrong, but where along this indicator, right, this cone, where are you in terms of what you can do with the language? And finally, we look at our